The power of not answering questions. Why silence is sometimes the highest truth. Opening transmission. There is a moment in the seeker's journey when the thirst for answers becomes a kind of noise, when every question becomes a loop and every answer a cage, and then something changes. The silence begins to speak louder than the words. The eyes rest longer in stillness than in seeking, and a strange, sacred realization arises. Some questions are not meant to be answered, because the answer would only reinforce the very illusion you are trying to dissolve. In today's sacred transmission, we explore the mysterious and often misunderstood power of not answering questions, not out of arrogance, not from fear, but from a place of inner clarity so deep it refuses to betray the truth through speech. This is not silence as avoidance. It is silence as presence. It is the power that lives behind the mouth, the radiance that speaks in stillness. Let us begin. 1. The addiction to questions. Most people live in a world built from questions. What am I doing wrong? What should I do next? Am I enough? Who is right? Who is wrong? What happens when I die? Will I ever be enlightened? And so on it spins. One question leads to another. One answer births 100 more. The mind is never satisfied. Even when you give it an answer, it wants a deeper one, a different one. It wants to understand until it can control. It wants certainty, so it can rest. But here is the sacred irony. The very questions we ask are often the very walls that block our realization. The mind asks from fragmentation. It cannot comprehend the wholeness it seeks. That's why the yogi does not always answer. That's why the rishi smiles, why the master looks into your eyes and says nothing. Because to answer your question might actually keep you from seeing. 2. The illusion behind the question itself. Let us go deeper. Every question carries a hidden assumption. Every question arises from a worldview, an identity, a belief. When someone asks, "How do I dissolve the ego?" they are still asking as the ego. When someone asks, "How do I get enlightened?" they assume there is a self that will gain something. But what if the very I asking the question is the illusion? What if the question itself is the veil? This is why the great sages of all ages spoke in silence, parable, or paradox, because any straight answer would nourish the very identity that must be let go. Not answering is not refusal. It is precision. It is mercy. 3. The power of presence without explanation. True wisdom does not explain itself. It radiates. It transmits. Think of the great Himalayan sadhus. They do not teach through words. They sit in forests, in caves, or in the quiet corners of ashrams. And those ready for truth simply feel them. Their presence becomes the teaching. Their eyes become the doorway. Their silence becomes your own reflection. In this way, not answering questions is not passive. It is active transmission. It is a higher kind of communication that bypasses the mind and reaches the root. Sometimes the most transformative thing a being can do for another is simply to hold their gaze, say nothing, and stay unmoved, because that stillness becomes a mirror, and that mirror shows the seeker what no concept ever could. 4. Protecting the sacred from misuse. There is another layer to this. Sometimes we do not answer questions because the one asking is not ready to receive the truth, not as a judgment, but as an act of protection. When a truth is too powerful and it enters a mind that is unprepared, it can distort. It can become egoic fuel. It can become weaponized. This is why, in nearly every esoteric tradition, there are teachings that are kept veiled, only given through direct experience, through practice, through transmission, and never through intellectual discussion. It's not secrecy out of elitism. It's protection out of love. To answer prematurely is to give fire to a child. The wise remain silent until the student is ready to hold the flame. 5. The healing of not knowing. There is deep healing. in not needing to know. When you stop chasing answers, when you stop trying to label every experience, when you allow yourself to live in the mystery, something opens, the heart softens, the breath slows, the nervous system unwinds. You become present, not because you figured it all out, but because you no longer need to. This is where true spiritual maturity begins, not in knowing more, but in needing less, in resting inside the unknown, in trusting the rhythm of your own unfolding. Some questions are answered by time, some by silence, some simply dissolve on their own. 6. The transmission behind the silence. There is a kind of nonverbal dialogue that only happens in deep presence, between master and student, between two beings in meditation, between the breath and the beyond. When you stop asking, you begin receiving, not in the way you expected, but in the way you truly need. A scent of stillness, a whisper of clarity, a flood of insight that has no words. You realize the answer was never missing. It was always here, behind your looking. You were just too loud to hear it. This is why some of the deepest realizations arise not during conversation, but after the question dies, after the struggle fades, after the mind gives up. Then it comes, a knowing deeper than knowledge, a truth that doesn't need to be said, because it is you. 7. When to answer and when not to. Now let us be clear. Not all questions should be ignored. Wisdom includes discernment. A sincere question from a humble heart can be the doorway to a great transformation. But the wise do not rush to answer. They listen beyond the words. They feel the energy behind the question. They look into the eyes, into the breath, into the posture, and from there they know. Sometimes the answer is a word, sometimes it is a silence, sometimes it is a touch, a laugh, a presence. The key is to speak only when what you say will nourish awakening, and to remain silent when your silence will do more. 8. You are not here to satisfy the mind. Let us now turn the gaze inward, you the seeker, you the teacher, you the awakened or awakening one. You are not here to satisfy every question. You are not here to appease the intellect of others, or even your own. You are here to dissolve, to melt into truth, to become the presence behind the veil. And sometimes that means disappointing others. They will want your answers. They will crave your insights. They will ask you to explain things that cannot be explained. And you must have the strength to stay silent, to say, I don't know, when it is true, to say you must find that in yourself when it is needed, because to do otherwise is to betray the sacred for the approval of minds. 9. The final question and the end of questioning. All questions come from the same root. Who am I? That is the first and last question, and it is not meant to be answered with words. It is meant to be lived, felt, died into, and eventually dissolved. There is no question when there is no separate self to ask it. There is only presence, and from that presence, silence is the most radiant answer of all. Mystical reflection. If you truly listen, there is a silence behind your every question that already knows. Every time you reach for an answer, pause, and notice the stillness behind the reaching. That is where the true teaching lives. In that stillness, you are already free. If this teaching has stirred something deeper in you, I invite you to walk this path of stillness with us. Subscribe to continue receiving transmissions like this, or become a member to support this sacred work in its preservation. Let us together honor the silence beneath all questions. Next transmission preview. In our next sacred offering, we enter the still geometry of the body itself, in a teaching called Cleaning the Aura Through Still Posture, how remaining motionless becomes a spiritual act of purification.